I'm Greg Woodring. I'm the president of Ann Arbor for Public Power. This is our November membership meet and greet, and we've got a really exciting meeting here for you today. We've got a special guest with us, Seth Berry, one of the leaders of the Pine Tree Power campaign in Maine. It was their campaign to take the entire state of Maine under public power. It was a very well-run campaign. I can say that I went to Maine just recently. I was up there over the weekend of October 16th with a bunch of organizers all over the country coming together to talk about how it is that we can start to support these campaigns and nurture these campaigns across the United States. I learned a lot. It was really great to be networked with all of these other fantastic organizers. I managed to see Seth there, as well as Lucy and many of the other members of the Pine Tree Power campaign. Despite their hard-fought campaign, they were outspent 40-1 in Maine, and Seth Berry will be able to speak to it more, but unfortunately, the vote did not win today. However, there is reasons to be hopeful for the future, and I'll let Seth get into that. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I will give us kind of campaign updates on the Ann Arbor Public Power campaign at the end of the meeting, but I want to go ahead and let Seth get straight into it. So Seth will give a bit of an overview of the campaign, and then we'll open it up for questions. We'll be taking questions both online and in the audience, and what we're going to do is we're going to alternate in person and online, assuming that we have ones ready for both. So just so you're aware of that. When we do questions, I only have this one mic, so I'll take your questions and then I'll recite them to the mic so that Seth can hear them, and then we'll go from there. So Seth, are you ready?
I sure am. It is great to be here.
Awesome.
And I'm told that I cannot start my video because the host has stopped it. That's what Zoom is telling me. So
Sean's on it. Sean, if you make him a co-host, that'll fix it.
Great.
If you go to participants, just click on participants. Yeah, right click them. Or more. Make co-host. Apologies for the AV issues, everybody. All right, can you do it now, Seth? Great.
There we go. Hey, it's great to see you all. And before I get into my spiel, I want to make sure you see behind me right there. There's a great poster that you guys put together for the wonderful event that I was privileged to attend and join you at. It's great to be back in Ann Arbor, so to speak. And feels like just yesterday that I was out there. And I was really inspired and fired up by your energy and all that you're doing with Ann Arbor for Public Power. For those that haven't met me yet, my name is Seth Berry. I use he, him pronouns. I'm from a little town called Bodenham, Maine. And I served in the state legislature for a total of 7 terms, 4 of which were spent on the Utilities and Energy Committee. I also served as majority leader and in some other roles, but it was my work on energy that I was most passionate about, and which led me ultimately to put in a couple bills to replace our very dysfunctional, dirty, expensive utilities, our 2 for-profit utilities here, which only deliver power but are incredibly frustrating in getting to clean energy, with a large non-for-profit utility called the Pine Tree Power Company. And those 2 bills were the predecessor. 2019 led to a feasibility study, and I know you're looking at a study now. And next steps, our next step was another bill which made some improvements based on the study. In 2021, we had a very positive outcome where the entire legislature voted in favor. Well, not everyone in the legislature, but a bipartisan majority of the House, a bipartisan majority of the Senate voted in favor of my bill to create the Pine Tree Power Company and kick out our 2 large investor-owned utilities once and for all. And unfortunately, our conservative Democratic governor did not agree that that was a good idea, vetoed it, and that sent us to collect the signatures at the ballot, which we kind of always expected. In fact, we were surprised that we got as far as we did. So with that encouraging vote of the House and Senate, we were all the more fired up to go out, collect the signatures, and put it on the ballot. We had initially hoped to be on the ballot in the fall of 2022 and couldn't quite get the signatures together in time. That did take longer than we expected. 80,000 signatures was a lot, and there was a pandemic happening. So we ended up being on the ballot in 2023. And of course, that was just this earlier this month. November 7th was the big vote. And as Greg said, we were outspent about 40 to 1. There will be some additional campaign finance reports. I think it's likely that we were actually outspent more than 40 to 1. And that's about 40 million on the part of the utilities to a little over $1 million that we pulled together during that 3-year period. And I want to emphasize the time frame that I just mentioned. There was a 3-year period. So the 2021 was when we had our ballot question committee formed and began to raise money. That money was directed towards moving the legislation through the legislature. So that was kind of phase 1. And we spent about $250,000 during that time. And then another $250,000 spent collecting the signatures in 2022. And really what we were left with was about $600,000 to spend on statewide advocacy during the actual campaign once it was officially on the ballot. So really we're talking $600,000 to the utilities spending $40 million on their statewide effort. And in that respect, the asymmetry was even worse. Those of you who have studied public power movements around the country and the areas where it has been successful, where people have actually seen through the avalanche of ads and the scare tactics, those of you who have studied that will know that the utilities have a playbook. The Edison Electric Institute, which is the for-profit industry, has a very sophisticated playbook, which the utilities work from. And we expected that. We knew that was coming. But even I, after 14 years in the state legislature, was shocked and aghast at just how sophisticated and powerful and crafty and completely free of integrity the utilities campaigns were. They were absolutely willing to promote complete falsehoods that tested well. And they were also able to use micro-targeting really well to first poll individuals and then to send them direct messages with trusted messengers, very sophisticated poll testing messages that appealed to their demographic, to their exact concern from those polls. And with that micro-targeting, both in mail and in media and in robocalls and in personal calls and direct outreach, they were able to persuade people who we really had hoped to have in our corner. So the final outcome last Tuesday was not what we hoped. We did not get our Pine Tree Power Company approved by the voters. We actually lost by about a little more than a 2-to-1 margin. So 69% voted against moving forward. 31% in favor. So the utilities spent at least $40 for every one that we spent, and they got a little over 2 votes for every one that we got. I want to talk a little bit about the good news. The good news is that, and thanks to many of you who have helped with your time, came to Maine, donated, helped to talk us up. We were able to generate some interest from funders, and that's going to be important to any effort that goes forward in the future. We recommend, especially after our experience, lining up the funders in advance if at all possible. If you can work with some key funders who, in addition to your grassroots funding, are going to really commit and see you through and help you to make sure that you have the resources to do some testing, of messages, to do some polling, to get out there on the media, that will be very, very useful. Especially true at a statewide level. I think some of the smaller community efforts that have succeeded, and I think of Winter Park, Florida. I think of Boulder, Colorado, which got a positive outcome. Although they did press pause, they really achieved a lot. Hermiston, Oregon, Jefferson County, Washington, Messina, New York, communities that have seen through the avalanche of ads, seen through the falsehoods, and voted to go forward have had uniformly positive outcomes. It hasn't always been, perfect in every way. Sometimes the transition's a little, bumpy, but always, on the whole, there's just a dramatically better outcome in terms of cost, in terms of reliability, in terms of clean energy. So I'm inspired by those smaller community efforts. At least a couple of them were in college towns, and I want to just mention that because Ann Arbor, I think, is a really good candidate in that regard. Interestingly, one of the things our polling told us, by the way, was that people with some degree of post-collegiate education were in our corner. That was the demographic that we actually fared the best with, folks with real higher education backgrounds. So, I think there's probably a higher percentage of folks with post-collegiate education, at least some, in the Ann Arbor area. That's going to help you as well, and it's a benefit when you can appeal to those folks. So let me just go over. I'm going to back up and just go over a few points that we want to make sure we cover with you as we kind of reflect back on our not ideal outcome. Some of the top lines. So just a great achievement, we think, was getting a majority of the House and Senate to vote in favor of this. No state has ever done that much before, so that was certainly a new high water mark for our movement, our collective movement nationally. We did put it on a statewide ballot as well, and we don't know of any place where that has happened either. So that's an achievement, and we're very proud of having been the first to go there. I will say too that things take time, right? Maine has a history of taking a couple go-rounds to enact legislation through direct democracy, or for that matter, through the legislature. So we were the first state to enact ranked choice voting. That took 2 tries. We were the first state to have one of the first to have a clean elections program. That took a couple go-rounds to get it right and solidify it. Marriage equality, we voted once against marriage equality. We voted a second time in favor. So, we're not giving up on this, and we want you to understand that. The national awareness of public power as a climate solution, of the importance of climate justice and of energy democracy, we think is at an all-time high. We've really learned a lot with folks like you, and we think that more and more attention is turning in this direction, and that can only be a positive. We think that we do have some things that we can share with folks like you and with others, and we hope to contribute in that way as well. Not having resources to talk to the people we needed to reach was really critical. And I've talked a bit about the funding the other side had. But I think if we had, instead of $1 million, if we had 3 or 4 million, that we really could have won. I've always believed from the beginning that with a 10-to-1 funding ratio, we would win this. And although we didn't meet our fundraising goals, that was kind of a benchmark for us. And being able to talk to voters was critical. When we could talk to voters, we had a 55% conversion ratio. We had phone banks, we did door-to-door canvassing. The people who we were able to speak to turned our way. And we believe the 31% that did vote in favor of this are really locked in. They were subject to an absolute avalanche of advertising. I would watch a show on, subscription television, and the ads were sometimes stacked on top of each other. I would watching a single episode of a rerun of West Wing, I would see, at least a dozen, maybe 20 ads from the opposition. You couldn't escape it. Social media, television, subscription TV, it was in your mailbox, it was on your phone, and certainly on social media. So the 31% that voted yes on this were doing it in spite of that ad. They were of that avalanche of ads. They were voting in favor of this because they had been inoculated. They truly understood what was going on and understood that the ads were false. We don't think those people are going away. We think that's a floor, not a ceiling, and it's one that we can build on. So I would encourage you to remember too that the conversations that you're having really are impactful and important. We had only three full-time staff and a small team of consultants, a couple of paid part-time interns. For a state with 1.3 million people, that's a pretty small team. And the rest was all just bootstrapping and volunteerism. We had a very small paid digital program. We were on Facebook, Instagram, Hulu, some YouTube ads, nothing at all on television. We did a lot with earned media and worked hard to talk to the press, to reach out, to write letters to the editor and op-eds. But we really were reliant primarily, again, on volunteers. So that's a big part of our story. Another thing that we, on the positive side, can talk about is that we did win in several cities and towns, largely more progressive areas, a bit like Ann Arbor. Portland, our biggest city, where some of you came to help canvass, did go our favor, although narrowly. And areas where we had more substantial field and volunteer and relational organizing presence definitely performed better. I want to just ask the question on your behalf, is referendum the best strategy? There are different ways to make this happen. A referendum is not the only one. Certainly, referendum is subject to huge spending, and in most cases, there are no limitations on what can be spent. We do think that the political influence of utilities is powerful, and that although we were able to convince Maine's legislature to favor this, we couldn't get it to the governor, in large part because of the political influence machine. So we still think that referendum is powerful if you have that avenue open to you, and not every community does. We still think that it is an incredibly powerful approach. Another thing that Lucy and I talked about that we just want to convey also is that we do think that utility spending on ads, although they seem to have unlimited resources, and that's certainly what we were up against, that their money may have diminishing returns. We did hear complaints about the number of ads, and I think the utilities were themselves aware that if they'd spent more than 40 million, if they'd approached 60 or 70 or 80 million, that they might really have reached the saturation point where they're in fact turning people off. So I think that although in a statewide race, the barriers to entry are harder maybe for a public power effort, when you're talking community by community, I think it is easier to reach everyone and do what Winter Park and Boulder and other places have successfully done. Let's see. So I think I've covered most of this already, and I want to get to your questions soon. Another point, though, I guess I just want to make sure I touch on is, building institutional relationships early and often. We weren't able to reach every liberal, every climate group even. We would recommend not taking climate groups and climate voters and liberal progressives for granted. The utilities did successfully get to some of them. And I think part of that goes back to their ability and willingness to misrepresent the truth, and also to kind of purchase influence within the boards and the membership of some of these groups. So I think looking at the lies that were told, looking at the misrepresentations that were made in our campaign will be helpful to you, because you can maybe head off some of those things and just call it out early. tell people this is what you can expect from utilities, because it's what we've seen in other areas. So don't be surprised when it comes your way. Let's see. And I think based on my knowledge, you've seen some of it already. Be realistic. I think super hard-nosed realism is important. What are your capabilities? How much can you really raise? How many people can you really talk to? How strong is your base? Before you go to the ballot, really do the polling early. We were relying on polling that was done in 2021, and when we really had to decide, are we going to the ballot? I think that the polling that we had at that point, when we were just about to turn in the signatures, was not as current, not as good as we would have liked. And some of the polling news that we got a little later, after we were already committed, it would have been helpful to have sooner. So, although it's maybe a little different in a small community, doing the research, really having some good, sophisticated baseline polling early on is incredibly helpful. And before you pull the trigger on going to ballot. So we are still hopeful that statewide campaigns can win in this effort, and that the relationships, including our relationship with you, will be beneficial. We think there's a strong and growing network now of energy democracy advocates, and we are happy to connect with you. I speak for Lucy, for Al, for myself, for the board, and continue to be in touch to support one another. So I think I'll end it there. And I know this is kind of a mixed group, so I'm happy to take questions that are more sort of about the fundamentals of the proposal, if you wish, or go more to the strategy of the campaign and other lessons that might be applicable to you. But really glad to be with all of you, and happy to stick around for as long as you like.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Seth. Sean, you want to turn the camera on again? And if you want to open up the Q&A, then I can read off of that and also take questions from the audience here. So just click the button. Okay. Awesome. Does anyone in the room want to start us off with a question here? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple of them. First one is, I don't know, do you need to repeat?
Yeah, just go ahead.
Have they had a chance to dig into the actual votes to pull out more than just education and like rural urban, like gender, age, income, like all those ethnicity, other kinds of things in terms of who voted for versus against?
Gotcha. So the question is, did you have some time to be able to dig into the demographics of who voted for and against you?
Yeah, great question. No is the short answer. There isn't any sort of exit polling or sufficient turnout data yet for us to answer that question. But what we do have is a poll that was done through the University of New Hampshire not long before the election. And I referenced that data that folks with at least some post-collegiate education did favor our proposal. That was from that specific poll. And it also showed that we had an advantage among Democrats, perhaps not surprising, but that those were really the only two demographics that were looked at where we clearly seemed to have the upper hand. So I think that polling was pretty good. I think, it's certainly consistent with what I was experiencing as I talked to voters. I will say, and I probably should have said this at the top too, this was an off year election for Maine, right? So there was no gubernatorial election. There were no legislative elections. There was obviously no presidential election. So really a lower turnout year. And although Maine has a very high rate of turnout typically, it does tend to be an older and more conservative electorate in the off years. So that probably hurt us as well. But it's a good question, and I hope to know more for the next time we talk.
Thank you, Seth. Go to the online questions now. We've got a decent amount of them from Lauren here. I'll start at the top. So I know that IBEW and labor in general were a bit of a difficulty at times for your campaign. Can you talk a little bit about the history of working with the IBEW and Pine Tree Power, and maybe some lessons learned and advice for us on that?
Yeah. So I'm gonna give you two insights that I've picked up along the way. Both of them very hard-won insights. So I hope they're helpful. One of them, and I actually learned this later, is that IBEW, this is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, for those that are not familiar, and they represent the unions that work for the transmission and distribution utilities, and also on the generation side. So these are DTE's workers, right? IBEW nationally has been very closely aligned politically with the for-profit utility industry for at least the last 20 years. There was a leader within IBEW who really decided to make common cause with the utilities and to throw down very hard in alignment. They actually formed a political action committee called LAMPAC, the Labor and Management PAC. And I think a lot of what they've done with that PAC is to protect coal jobs, to advocate for, coal plants to stay open, and politicians to support coal and slow down on pushing solutions like solar and wind. The perception of the utilities, I think, has been that the coal jobs are more numerous and more likely to stick around. That once you build a solar plant, it's less likely to need maintenance. So there's that piece. They've also advocated for rate hikes, and we saw that recently in Connecticut, where our own utility, one of the affiliates of our utility here in Maine, it's an Avangrid company, was pushing for a rate hike in Connecticut and turned out IBEW members to advocate for rate hikes on Connecticut customers. And, I think the justification there is probably self-explanatory, but, I think the logic, and this is where LAMPAC, comes in again, is if the utility shareholders get a rate hike and there's more money coming in the door, then at least some of the crumbs are going to go to the workers. The lion's share might go to the shareholders, but the workers might benefit a little bit as well. So those are national big picture observations. The only other thing I want to say about national is that IBEW has a very top-down structure. So there's an international manager, there are regional business managers, and the regional manager, who in our case is in Boston, not in Maine, but in Boston, can pick up the phone and fire a utility business manager, a union business manager here in Maine, without explanation, without a vote of the membership here. They can actually get rid of a business manager who isn't doing what they want done. So we think that the top-down structure and the close alignment from the top were very hurtful to us in sort of setting the table. And then once the table was set, we experienced really what I can only call a betrayal, where I was putting forward the first bill in 2019, and I went to the union and I said, I want to make sure this works for you. How can I make it work? How can we write it the best, as best as possible? I was given some initial feedback and put that in. And we did, I was very gratified. We did have the union business manager, the leader of the union, appear at that initial press conference in January of 2019 saying, we support this bill. We support forcing these utilities to sell and changing them for a nonprofit. And specifically what he said was, we're here and supporting this because something's got to change. Someone's going to get killed out there. There aren't enough bucket trucks. There aren't enough line workers. There are line workers who are working without a spotter in their bucket trucks. So his concern was safety, and he made that very clear from the start. And I think he knew very well that what he was doing was not, in fact, supporting our effort in the long term, but rather positioning himself for a settlement with the utilities. And in fact, that is what happened. The utilities went to him, unbeknownst to me. I was working through the process and thinking we had the support of the union. And the utilities went to him and said, Dick, what do you need? How can we get you to stop supporting this? And he said, I need 60 new line workers. I need 30 new bucket trucks. Give me that, and we'll withdraw our support, and we will oppose this effort. And before I knew it, within just a few months, I had the same person who had appeared at the press conference in support saying, we no longer support this. We've signed an agreement that we will oppose it for the next 5 years. And there was really nothing that I could do about it. They had agreed to hire the new line workers, to give the new bucket trucks, or purchase the new bucket trucks, and for that small price, we were sold out. So I guess I would just be cautious in negotiating with IBW that a commitment is really a commitment, and that it is solid, that they're not going to sell you out, because that temptation will happen. DTE will go to your locals. You'll have great conversations with IBW, and then DTE will go to them and say, what do you need? What's it going to take? How can we buy your support for our perspective, and withdraw your support for A2P2? So just be cautious, be forewarned. Money talks, and I think the saying in politics is everyone has a price. So make sure you get it, very clearly if there is support in return for whatever concessions you're putting into your proposal.
Thanks, Seth.
Get it in writing.
Yeah. Difficult. We are committed to working with the IBW. We're making efforts, but it's sobering and good information. So I appreciate you sharing that. All right, we'll go Rita, and then Catherine, and then yeah.
Do you have any idea how much dollar donations were given to legislators in the state of Maine who have spoken out against, let's say, looking at the negative side?
I'm sorry, I forgot that I had to repeat it. Do you know how much money is going towards the people who were speaking against pantry powers? So how much money was being funneled into the opposed politicians?
Yeah, a lot of the 40 million did go to hire former politicians, political leaders, validators, including, by the way, folks who operated in the social media sphere and in the comment section of the newspapers to provide the appearance of grassroots support for the utilities. We call that astroturfing, right? So we know of probably a dozen or so political leaders who, many of them Democrats, because they felt that was where they needed to cut into our base of support most, who were hired for a pretty penny to work for the utilities. Now, it is a little hard to trace the exact amounts because the utilities often paid them through third parties. So we have pretty good disclosure laws here in Maine, but the utilities can pay a consultant, and that's what's disclosed. And then the consultant can pay someone else. They can, hire individuals to go around the state and speak and to work, the channels, to appear in ads, etc. And that part is not disclosed. So there's a lot we don't know. one former colleague of mine was working very part-time, and we know that she was paid $8,000 a month. So what's that, like 96,000 a year, I guess, for a very part-time gig. Coming from the legislature, where we make a 12,000 a year, that was pretty good money for her, and I think that was enough for her to get on board with doing it. We know that the governor has never been elected through clean elections here in Maine, and does depend on corporate and individual donations. I can tell you that our governor has not received a direct corporate contributions for the most part from the two utilities, but there's a lot of bundling that happens, and there are many law firms which, although we call them law firms, their biggest function is lobbying. And in fact, all of the largest law firms here in Maine have a very significant lobbying presence in the State House, and all of them except one work for the utilities or for their parent companies. The governor did receive about 160,000 in donations. We've calculated through employees of those law firms that work for the utilities donating to her campaigns or to her inauguration committees. So there's some of that. But I think maybe the biggest takeaway for me in terms of the influence of money has been really understanding better the function of the revolving door and the gravy train, where people will, after supporting the utilities while in office, they will go on to very lucrative employment with the utilities or with their parent companies or for one of those law firms that represents them. And I'm happy to share a document. I've been keeping track of the gravy train, and are trying to do our best to show just how impactful it is here in Maine. I think if we can shut down the gravy train and shut down the use of ratepayer dollars to fund political, retirement homes for politicians, as well as political advertising, will go a long way towards improving the environment for public power campaigns in the future.
Thank you, Seth.
Follow up? How does he track a legislator who goes into work for a corporation or a utility?
Do you have a way of being able to tell when somebody goes to work for a utility?
Yeah, I mean, it's imperfect, right? Because not every employment arrangement is known, but Maine's a pretty small state. And having served in the legislature for as long as I have, I'm able to kind of keep in touch with former colleagues and what they're doing. When we were first starting up our effort, and Governor Mills, our current governor, was a new governor, one of the first hires of our larger utility, CMP, was a very close friend and top campaign advisor to the governor, former assistant Democratic leader in the Senate by the name of Don Hill. Don was hired on by the utility supposedly to improve their community relations and customer relations. I think it was pretty clear to anyone with half a brain in Maine that the real purpose was to bring in more people inside of the utilities leadership structure who could then pick up the phone and call the governor, who had close relations with the governor and could reach out. It's not all done through money, by the way. A lot of it is relationships. So if someone has a personal relationship, the utilities are very good about reaching out and working that relationship. But how else do you know? I mean, you can use LinkedIn. There are lots of people who are pretty enterprising about using the modern digital environment to track what people are up to and where they do land. I think it's really important to look at law firms though as well, because law firms are often where a lot of this is housed. And so I'll give one other example. A former Democratic governor of Maine by the name of John Baldacci, while he was in office between 2000 and 2008, his Public Utilities Commission approved an incredibly lucrative transmission project in Maine, which turned out really not to be necessary, but It was $1.4 billion that they invested over 20 years. They'll make back about 4 times that amount. It's a 14% return on equity for their money, incredibly good money. And also improve the merger, which this current multinational that owns our utility was approved to purchase it. That governor immediately went on to the board of the parent company of our utility. The board, the holding company in the U.S. is called Avangrid. He went onto the board, and to go to 6 meetings a year, he was paid $200,000. So 6 meetings, $200,000, pretty good. And in addition, that same governor has continued to be of counsel at Pierce Atwood, which lobbies for that law firm and typically brings in about $4 million a year from them. So I've done my research says that if you're of counsel at a major law firm, you're probably making another 200,000 or 250 minimum for being of counsel, maybe making a few phone calls, doing a few, a modest amount, very modest amount of work. So my guess is that former Governor Baldacci's been hauling in about 400,000 a year, maybe 500,000. I can't prove the of counsel part, but we do know about the membership on the board. So some of it is educated guesswork, some of it is actually documented. And I think you have to keep track of that and tell those stories because you can't make this stuff up. The truth really is worse than most people can even imagine. And so you need to show it, you need to prove it. And opinion leaders, your local, editorial boards, anyone who you believe really does care about the future of Ann Arbor needs to be able to see, and Michigan needs to be able to see how DTE is behaving to the extent that you can document it.
Thank you, Seth. Staggering corruption, but I think it shows how much clearly there is a difference where you're out of the legislature doing this work. So hats off to you for that. Catherine.
Yeah, what strategies have you found effective in getting volunteers involved in your organization?
Yeah, so the question is, what strategies have you found effective to engage and retain volunteers?
Phone calls and talking to people directly. I guess Lauren Sargent, who I know is watching this from home, I think is very good at this, and I suspect would probably agree with me that reaching out to people directly is the best thing. I mean, certainly, keeping in touch with them by email and social media and, keep showing that there's momentum, having events like this, that's all incredibly important. And, and giving people those multiple opportunities to sign up to help, but then also, calling them and saying, hey, we've got this thing next Tuesday, we've got a rally, we've got this, we've got that, can you be there? And, having a phone tree to make sure that those calls do happen is also really valuable. There's nothing like that personal direct outreach. The other thing that I would encourage, and I don't think I'm perfect at this, or that we are, is signing people up in advance. It's a lot easier for me to commit to something that's a month away than something that's, on Tuesday. So to the extent that you can really be planful, you can make a lot more happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Seth. Sean?
2 sort of related questions. The first is, when did the sort of propaganda from utilities really come into full force? So what was sort of the timeline, I guess, for when that propaganda was most intense? And then, the playbook from the Edison Institute you mentioned, the one that leaked that I've seen and have access to is from 2002. I'm curious, for what you've seen, what do you think are the updates to that playbook that have happened since then that would use it?
Yeah, great questions. And Greg, I heard them, so
okay.
that you don't need to repeat it. With respect to the timing of the utilities ads, it was definitely a ramp up. So they, their fear, uncertainty, and doubt campaign, their political ads really began in 2021. 2022, though, they got a lot more intense about it and began to appear on social media and on television. And then 2023, it really reached a crescendo, and they really hit us early. They came out early, like in January of last year, with a big buy. They were on television early on in the campaign season. I think their understanding was that we had the upper hand. Going into it, we were up 2-1, right? We remember we lost by 2-1, but we were up 2-1 at the beginning. So they knew they had ground to cover, and they had to really reset the narrative. Our support was not solid; it wasn't locked in yet, and they knew that. We had people who supported the idea in theory when they were asked, in a simple, straight up poll. So I would say, yeah, they came out, they really started to hit us hard, and, get up on TV and on digital a full year before the votes or close to that. And I think that was effective. They knew that, by getting out there early, they could start to sway people, pick up some momentum, and also, I think, scare away people who were thinking about supporting us, potential donors. They didn't want people to feel like we had momentum. They wanted the momentum to be on their side and to be able to talk about that. So that's something that they will also try to do. If you come out strong and say, we've got all this support, we've got this many people, we've got this many organizations, they will work during the as much time as you give them before the vote to show that they have momentum, that they're picking up steam. They'll announce, that a new business has signed on to their coalition, that a new group has signed on to their coalition. And, that was a big part of their strategy as well. So I think that what they are doing now, to answer the second question, different from the kind of utility playbook that we've seen, that I think was written, maybe its first iteration was at least 20 years ago. I mean, I've seen a version of it that was in an old, spiral binder that had been Xeroxed. I think it was, the advent of the internet, the advent of micro targeting, the advent of really sophisticated campaign tools, astroturfing. These are some of the things I think have come along that they're able to use very effectively now, and that you do need to watch out for, especially when it is a larger electorate that you're trying to appeal to, because it's just harder to be, mano a mano, to be relational in your organizing. But I think you have an advantage in that you are talking about a smaller community than we were working in. The only other thing I just want to say is they're very smart about appealing to Democrats and appealing to people who are climate forward and democracy forward in their thinking. They've become very good at that because they understand that all they need to say is government takeover, and conservatives go running in the other direction, right? So it's very easy for them to scare away conservatives. Government takeover, say that 3 times and they're out, right? They're on board with the utilities perspective. But people who do believe that government is part of the solution, that government can be a force for good, who are more democratic, right, are harder for them to reach. So they've become very intentional and very sophisticated about buying enough democratic and environmental validators to appeal to that part of the electorate. And they'll certainly have to do that in Ann Arbor, right? It's a Democratic town. So what will they do? They'll probably donate to popular nonprofits in your community and make a big deal of their donations and their support. They might even ask for some support in return. We've seen that from Avangrid and in places like Connecticut, and happened here as well. They will place their employees and their directors and their leadership on important boards. They will seek to enlist the support of people who are expecting jobs later on, and also people who are paid either directly or, as we mentioned earlier, indirectly by the utilities for their advocacy. So those are just some of the things that they'll try to do. And in terms of messages, one thing they'll say is that this will be a long and drawn out process. You know, we're going to sue you and we're going to make it really hard. It's going to take a really long time. And we don't have time for that. We're trying to get to clean energy. We need to move forward with our climate goals. You know, we shouldn't be doing this crazy, risky, expensive thing. They'll also talk about it as expensive, because they'll focus you on the price tag, the initial price tag for buying the house, rather than the fact that you'll be paying less per month for the mortgage than you were on the rent, right? So they try to create sticker shock. And that's another big point of the message that they try to drive home as well. So it's going to be costly. It's going to take a long time. That will slow us down in our climate goals. And, you know, it's just too risky. It's too risky. There's a lot we don't understand about your proposal. You know, there's a lot that you haven't spelled out. There are things that could go wrong. So let's just not do it.
Thanks, Seth. Chuck?
Actually, at the very end there, you spoke to my the points I was thinking about. It's and I think we see some of those same tactics here with the recent report where they're trying to make the claim that it's going to cost all this money to buy out PPE.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my response was trying to work on a spreadsheet, trying to calculate what I thought it would actually cost to buy out PPE and come up with my own projections. Did you guys try anything like that? Like run your own calculations, your own model, financial model?
So to repeat the question, did you do some more analysis after your feasibility study to be able to kind of come up with some of the counter arguments against that type of cost shock?
We did, and we had some incredible work done by a local energy economist. He's the fellow who really the premier consultant for Maine's large industrial users of electricity. Maine's factories, you know, they are most exposed more than anyone, arguably, to you know, the cost of electricity. So Dr. Richard Silkman, this energy economist, Yale PhD, who runs this business that consults with factories, he did what he called the restatement of the feasibility study our Public Utilities Commission put together. And just to back it up, the PUC did a study, our Utilities Commission. It came out saying that most likely we would see a savings over time, but the rates might go up just a little bit at first and then go down and continue downward. It wasn't bad, you know, it wasn't terrible news, but they couched it with a lot of risk and uncertainty language that did, you know, also scare some people away. Dr. Silkman did his analysis and looked at their assumptions, their underlying assumptions, and found that in fact, they had erred in a lot of those assumptions, and that the reality would be the cost would go down immediately. That yes, you can buy the house. It might have a high sticker price, but you can buy the house and your mortgage will cost less than your rent. Your bill will go down and you'll still be paying off that initial purchase. And we did our best to show that math and to share his analysis. He authored op-eds and spoke on Zoom to people, you know, as best we could assemble audiences. He attended meetings of editorial boards with us, and he was joined in many of those op-eds and letters and Zoom meetings by other energy economists and other just economists in general who came from, you know, an environmental space or, you know, just kind of a straight ahead, guy that worked for the Bureau of Economic Analysis, you know, people who had really impressive credentials, Yale and Harvard PhD economists. And although we put all that forward, the utilities were able to reach the average voter with a much simpler message, which is just, this is going to cost, they kept saying $13.5 billion. That was a number that a consultant made up for them. They paid to have that done. It was a completely fictitious number, but by making the lie big enough and repeating it often enough, they were able to convince voters that that was the number. So the number that came to everyone's mind, even our own supporters sometimes, was 13.5 billion. It was that sticker shock number, right? It was an inflated number. It was probably, twice what we would actually have had to pay for the utility. But it's what people focused on.
They quoted $1 billion for the top end. I think it's more like half that. But that was my calculation. I don't claim to be an expert. So.
Awesome. Oh, thank you, Seth, and thank you, Chuck. Seth, we are a little bit after 4. I know I told you I'd get you out of here at 4. I really appreciate you spending your time with us. I think that there are a few more questions we have. If we sent you those as like an email, would you be willing to respond to those?
Yeah, Greg, if you want, I can stick around a little longer.
Oh, that's
or
fantastic.
We can do it that way. Either way.
Yeah, we're happy to keep you going. All right. All right. Yeah. So another question that we had here from Lauren online, and then I'll get to some more in the audience here was, and I think you've already spoken to this a little bit, maybe just in a little more detail, what were the most effective arguments that you saw in the IOU's advertising and in their campaign? Like, what were kind of those big arguments that you heard people repeating opposed to public power?
Yeah, definitely risk, uncertainty. It's easier to convince people to vote no on something because, any change, especially a big, important change, does have inherent risk. And, they build on that because, when people are feeling insecure and uncertain, they're much more likely to say no. So it's going to be expensive. It's going to take a really long time. It'll set us back in our climate goals, and there are just too many unknowns. There are too many things that we don't know about. They seized on some language in our plan, in our bill, which called for the utility to put together a 5-year plan, and that was a very specific kind of planning process that was envisioned. They seized on the language to claim that we had no plan. Now. It couldn't be further from the truth, but that doesn't matter. They were just pointing to that and saying, they don't have a plan. They don't have a plan. And that's about uncertainty, right? Again, that's creating the appearance of risk, the appearance of uncertainty. And there's that old saying, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know, right? And that's really what I think the utilities do plan on. Again, they're very, very good at micro targeting, so you won't be able to see this, but I received mailers myself, or friends of mine did, who are Democratic, and these are headlines from the news that they claimed were bad news, but they talk about the labor being opposed. They talk about not having a plan. They talk about costs possibly going up and higher rates, tied up in courts for years, right? And actually, this one might not be that targeted, but there were some more climate focused. Oh yeah, this one says Governor Janet Mills, environmental leaders and labor unions oppose question 3. Now that's a dramatically, this whole thing is just wildly untruthful. First of all, the quotes that I showed you make it look like these news stations, these trusted news outlets have actually said that these things will happen. Channel 13 says that customers will see higher rates. Channel 13 says there's no operations plan. Channel 8 says cost of electricity would likely increase. These were actually claims that the utilities made on news stories on those outlets, right? So they're quoting themselves, but they're attributing it to the news outlets. And is that dishonest? Absolutely. But it doesn't matter. They are incredibly dishonest, incredibly willing to be dishonest. And oh, keep in mind, this is just a baseline thing that I think people forget. There is absolutely no prohibition on lying in political advertising. Zero. You can lie all day long in political ads and nobody's going to hold you accountable, because the First Amendment has been interpreted to mean that speech is unrestricted when it comes to politics, and that the money spent on it is essentially unlimited as well, right? That speech equals money, and therefore you can spend as much as you want. So expect lies and expect lots of them. Again, I've been in politics for 16 years. I've never seen anything like the amount of lies and dishonesty that we did see. So yeah, I mean, just straight up falsehood, but making sure that the message was appealing to the demographic who they were targeting in that particular news outlet or in that piece of mail.
Yes.
You sent us a copy?
Can you send us a copy of that if you have a chance?
Yeah,
You can just take a picture of it.
I can scan it or take a picture. Sure. Yeah, you bet.
That'd be great.
Just yeah, many things like it too. I'll come up with a couple to send you.
That'd be great. Appreciate that.
So, my question is, one of the things that's happening here in Ann Arbor that's driving this is, the issue of power reliability. I'd say the citizens are actually outraged at how poorly our utilities perform. To what extent did that play into what happened in Maine? I mean, maybe you have a more stable utility system than we do, but I think that is a huge issue here in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, and so the question is, what role did reliability play in the Pine Tree Power campaign? Because it's certainly a large issue for us here in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, I'm looking for an ad that actually dealt with that as well. So we have the most frequent outages in the country as a state, based on EIA data in most recent years. So we actually talked about that a lot. You know, that was one of our talking points. We have the 5th highest rates in the country. We have the most frequent outages. We have the worst customer satisfaction. You know, these were real strengths for our campaign because our utilities truly are horrible. They're absolutely horrible, and their customers hate them. But the fear of change and the fear of reliability, you know, of the fear of service getting even worse is also real. So one of the ads that was on television was an emergency medical technician. These are utilities ads. We weren't on television. Emergency medical technician who was, you know, doing, you know, CPR practice and working with dummies and safety equipment, you know, in the emergency medical training center. And, you know, he turns to the camera and says, I don't trust politicians to run the grid. And, you know, if the lights go out here, you know, people are going to die. So the idea that change could actually produce worse service than what DTE is delivering you is something that they will attempt to put across. I guarantee you they will attempt to make the point that things could be worse than they are with DTE. Now, I agree with you that that's not the case. I was actually had the pleasure in the what was I there for? 36 hours maybe the other day in Ann Arbor, and I had the pleasure of trying to navigate a major 4-way intersection with multi-lane traffic that couldn't figure it out because the lights, you know, were off. So I get it. I mean, you guys do have terrible service, but don't be surprised if the utilities try to put it one over on people and say that things will actually get worse. It's all about risk, right? Here's another ad that they put out. This is classic, you know, playing cards, right? You know, it's too risky. The risk of gambling, you gotta it's a risky game, and you got to know when to fold them. So, you'll see things like this too. But I want to give you a little hope. Winter Park, Florida, which experienced a ton of ads against it, a college town in Florida, as you know, Rollins College is located there. They saw a lot of very similar ads. Instead of playing cards, I remember there was a rolling the dice ad, and they were dramatically outspent, but they voted 69% in favor of going forward, and that went beautifully. And as you work to convince people that it's not risky, that it really can be done, that it is false what you're seeing in the ads that are going to be sponsored by TTE, I would encourage you to get really good at telling the stories of communities that have actually gone forward. I put in the chat earlier, right at the top of this session, a link to a document that I created, which I call case studies. And I think it's really important to just memorize those stories and tell them again and again and again, and maybe pick one or two, but challenge the utilities. Show me one place where it really, really has not worked. They'll talk about Boulder, but Boulder was a win, and you should be prepared to talk about why it was a win. They'll talk about Long Island, New York, probably, but that's dramatically different from what you're proposing, and you can say that. And by the way, Long Island, I think, was also on net a win. But talk about Winter Park, talk about Jefferson County, talk about the Emerald Pud, Kauai out in Hawaii, so many places, Messina, New York, every place that has actually been done where the utilities haven't succeeded in scaring people, it has worked beautifully. And that's the proof that's in the pudding, right? That's what I think that people can, at the end of the day, can believe is tell me a story and tell me a true story, and I'll believe you.
Thank you, Seth. Catherine?
What techniques you found useful in relational organizing?
Can you speak to more of the techniques that you employed in relational organizing?
Yeah, I think we should have done more with relational organizing, but essentially, the relational organizing that we were able to do, a lot of it, there are apps nowadays where you can just pull up your contacts from your phone and input them into the voter lists if you've purchased the voter list. And you can reach out to people, you can text them or call them and say, hey, I'm really excited about A2P2. Are you on board? You'll be voting in favor of whatever it is, Proposition 2. Yes, great. You put them down. Hey, do you want to volunteer? We take a lawn sign, you donate, you put that all down. And that just organizing through your friends, through your own contacts is so powerful. And it's the best kind of outreach. Going to strangers and knocking on their door is also great. If you've never done it, believe me, it really is a lot of fun to talk to people and to hear what they have to say, and to get good at telling your story and talking about why you're fired up. But that kind of traditional canvassing, phone banking, we also do phone banking with that, text banking, that doesn't have the unique advantage of being relational, of someone that you actually know and can reach out to. So that's basically how we have seen it done, how it has worked well with other campaigns. Again, I think it would have been nice if we could have done more of it, and I would encourage you to use that in your efforts.
Awesome. Thank you, Seth. I'm going to take another one here from Lauren online. Can you speak a bit to the value that you see in survey research, message testing, focus grouping, and furthermore, what do you think about the possibility of employing something like the university or other more grassroots people to do this type of research versus going with like a professional contracting firm?
Yeah, I think for a lot of purposes, going with some local talent makes a ton of sense. I know that the University of Michigan has incredible skill sets and capacities. So I love that idea. I definitely think that it would be great if you could, cut some of your initial expenditures and, some support more in kind. I'm sure that would have the collateral benefit too of, having students and others that were involved in that research, getting excited, getting knowledgeable. So yeah, on balance, I think it's a great idea. I just would also make sure that it's rigorous and that you really are getting a very hard-nosed look at the baseline. You should anticipate and test opposition arguments, and you should assume in your baseline survey that you're being outspent at least 10 to 1. And I would recommend even testing beyond that. So test a lot of opposition messages, repeat utility talking points during that survey 10 times for every one time that you put forward one of your talking points, and see then how you perform. It may not be pretty. You may find that when in fact the respondent to the survey is hearing 10 arguments from the utilities for every one that they hear from you, that you don't do as well. So, be realistic, assume that you'll be outspent, and make sure your baseline survey instrument is really reflecting that, so that you're not, surprised by the outcomes along the way later.
Thank you, Seth. More from the audience? Catherine?
Any ideas on how to turn like support your cause or advocating for your cause?
Yeah, can you talk us a little bit more about just kind of the volunteer pipeline, taking people who are supportive to active volunteers and active participants?
Yeah, it's a great question. I can tell you that people do take a little time to get excited and get on board with this idea, but that once they're committed, they just really are committed. They really get it and they're fired up. So I think that in many respects, our loss is because we were the first to, try this statewide. We were the first to, in Maine, certainly, to push this forward in a significant way, at least there was a referendum back in 50 years ago, actually, in Maine, slightly different version, but for all intents and purposes, we were starting from zero. People were not aware, but I guess one of the biggest things that you have to kind of get over with people is the idea that the monopoly is a privilege, and that you do have the right to kick out a private business and to purchase their assets. There's a sense of fairness that people have, and I think it's natural and it's human to say, why should we force someone to sell their property? How can that be right? And can't we just along with that, people often think, well, can't we just regulate better? So you'll bump up against those two things, and I think it can kind of slow people down. But once you help people to understand what's unique about utilities, that the monopoly is a privilege, and they use the public rights of way and have a captive customer base, because we allow it. And once they also understand that this monopoly is basically printing money off of us, and the whole system in the US is very rigged, and it's, DTE is dirty, et cetera, et cetera. And that the case studies show that you can get to clean energy much faster, and again, go to those case studies and tell the story, then you can get people fired up. And I would also start with inspiring people. I realize that, this conversation tonight has been a downer because, obviously we've suffered a loss, and I want to give you the unvarnished truth. But public power is incredibly inspiring. And I know you're doing work inspiring people with that every day. I was inspired when I looked at the first 6 communities in the US that got to clean energy. And I realized, with the help of my friend Johanna Bozua, who's amazing, that all 6 were served by consumer-owned utilities. I was inspired when I looked at large utilities, like the size of DTE, and across the country realized that all of the leaders among large utilities in getting to clean energy are community-owned utilities. Sacramento, Seattle, LA, those are the leaders in getting to clean energy, hands down. And it's not even close. So, we know that when you are focused on people and planet instead of profits, that you do a better job as a utility. The case is closed on that. You have examples of small utilities right there in Michigan. I think just reminding people, telling those inspirational stories again and again, have some people, have the, folks come in, drop in from some of those utilities and talk to you. I think you've done some of that already. The Sierra Club endorsed us and we pushed that out. That inspired people. Bill McKibben endorsed us and came to Maine to say that, this was the biggest thing on our ballot, on any ballot in the US in November of this year. So I think you just work to keep people inspired, and you also get together and have fun and enjoy each other's company. There's nothing like, having pizza or beer afterwards. And I know you guys are good at having fun too. So I'm not too worried, honestly, about your ability to attract volunteers. I think that maybe the only other thing I'll add there is, because I don't know, how are you reaching out to students? How are you engaging with young people? I know there are a lot of young people there. We were very fortunate to have Maine Youth for Climate Justice and Maine Climate Action Now, some groups of young people engaging on this. I think identify those youth champions and really empower them to be supportive and help them to be supportive, so that you can engage with the incredible energy and persuasive power of young people as well.
Thank you, Seth. And that's a great segue into me saying that we do actually have a Students for Public Power. So if you are a student or you know a student at U of M, please connect them with that. I'm going to use my moderator privilege here real quick just to ask you one question in that inspiring vein, because I was really inspired by your Prop 2 that passed on your ballot. Could you speak to that a little bit and how that might contribute to future efforts to do this?
Yeah, good point, Greg. So that is another really positive outcome, which I didn't mention. And a number of us who were involved from the start in the Pine Tree Power campaign were frustrated that utilities were able to spend so much money, just ungodly amounts of money, on Maine ballot question campaigns. And we learned that there are states where the referendum is allowed, but there are some restrictions on spending, specifically restrictions on, believe it or not, foreign governments spending on ballot questions. And there's a really interesting line in the sand, effectively, between foreign governments and corporations owned by foreign governments and just straight up corporations. For the whole history of this country, there's been a clear suspicion of foreign government interference. The framers of the US Constitution expressed sometimes that their number one concern was interference by foreign governments in this new democracy. And so we have a very clear grounding for limiting that kind of spending on our elections. In fact, candidate elections in the US are already protected. So foreign governments cannot spend on candidate elections in the US. That's federal law. But referendum questions are governed locally. They're part of state constitutions. In Maine, our state constitution allows for referendum, but Maine law is silent on whether foreign governments can spend on our elections. So all we did was a very simple ballot question and put it on the ballot alongside our Pine Tree Power Company question, which said, foreign governments and corporations owned by them, at least 5% ownership, will no longer be allowed to spend on Maine referendum questions. Full stop. It was a very simple ballot question. You know, there was essentially no money put into it. I mean, we did raise some money for it. There was a separate organization promoting that question, and it passed overwhelmingly. It passed 86% to 14%. So ironically, people voted overwhelmingly in favor of prohibiting the very spending that they then believed in opposing the Pine Tree Power Company. It's a very ironic outcome. But the good news is that because we've shut the door on that kind of spending in the future, our two utilities, because they have that kind of ownership, they have at least 5% foreign government ownership, will actually be prohibited. As long as we can keep that the law, prevent any court challenges, and we think we can, we will be much more immune from this kind of spending in the future here in Maine. I think it is a very unique situation, though, because we do happen to have, you know, these two utilities that have significant foreign government ownership. One of our utilities is owned by the government of Calgary, the city government of Calgary in Alberta. The other is owned 10.8% owned by the government of Qatar in the Middle East. And so we've been able to you know, use that unique situation to our advantage to set us up for future progress. I would look for any Achilles heel that you can find with DTE. And, you know, if that's one of them, great. If not, I'm sure you'll find others. But every utility that I know of in the country has an Achilles heel. You just need to find it.
Thank you, Seth. I know that there are some people in Michigan that are looking at something similar to that. So hopefully we may see something like that materialize in the future.
Cool.
We're at about 4:30 now. So I do think that we should wrap up here. Thank you for giving us this extra time here, Seth. I think that this was an incredibly enlightening conversation. And while it was a loss today, I think that you've laid a lot of groundwork for the future, and you've certainly been inspiring to us. So really thank you for all of the work that you've put into this and continue to put into this.
Well, thank you, Greg. And it's great to be with all of you. I wish you the best in your next steps. And we're not going away, and I recommend you not go away either.
We certainly won't.
Nelson Mandela, somebody out there when I was in Ann Arbor reminded me, I can't remember, maybe it was Lauren, but one of you guys reminded me that Nelson Mandela said that everyone says it's impossible until it is done. And that's a watchword for me, and it should remain one for you as well. We'll get there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Power to the people.
All right. Take care, everybody.